Earl Vance was the town's most trusted deputy. Elellanena Riggins was the librarian everyone adored. Travis Minter was the high school kid with a bright future. None of them had anything in common, except for the fact that one of them was a monster, and the others were his trophies. This is the story of the Bone Weaver, the most methodical and terrifying serial killer you've never heard of. Rusk County, Texas, in the early 1990s, was the kind of place people went to escape chaos. Tucked between forests and forgotten highways, it was quiet, slow-moving, and proud of being uneventful. People left their doors unlocked, kids played outside until dusk, and no one expected anything sinister to creep into their lives. That changed in the spring of 1992, when a 17-year-old boy named Travis Minter disappeared on his way home from school. His bike was later found lying beside a ditch just off Route 59, its frame bent as if it had been dropped. No tire. Marks, no scuffle, no blood, nothing that hinted at what had happened to him. At first it was assumed he ran away. Maybe he'd had a fight with his parents. Maybe he got into trouble and skipped town. But his family insisted he was happy, with plans for college and no history of leaving without notice. 2 months later, the community was still searching when a second person vanished. This time it was 68-year-old Elellanena Riggins, a retired librarian who lived alone and stuck to a rigid routine. She was last seen leaving her home to walk to the local community center for bingo night. When she never arrived, her neighbors became concerned. Her purse was still on the kitchen table, and her front door was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. Her keys were missing, and so was she. The town began to feel the first pangs of unease. People who once walked freely at night now glanced over their shoulders. The sheriff's department, overwhelmed and under-equipped, assured residents there was no evidence of a connection between the two disappearances. After all, they were from different age groups, backgrounds, and parts of town. It wasn't until the third person went missing that fear took root. Marcus Boyd, a local mechanic and father of 2, was last seen at his shop late one evening. A customer found the place eerily silent the next morning, lights still on, a wrench left balanced on an open hood, and the shop's back door swinging slightly in the breeze. Police searched the surrounding woods, brought in dogs, and questioned everyone who had spoken to Marcus that day. Nothing. He was gone, just like the others. By now, the whispers had started. Parents kept their children indoors, and old-timers recalled long-forgotten stories of disappearances from decades earlier. The sheriff doubled down on patrols, but behind closed doors, deputies admitted they had no leads, no common pattern, no clues, just 3 people, healthy, stable, ordinary, who had vanished from their everyday lives without leaving a single trace. Some speculated it was a serial kidnapper. Others believed in cult activity, or something worse hiding in the deep woods that surrounded the town like a dark curtain. The local paper avoided the word serial, but neighbors were already treating it as such. Something was happening in Rusk County, something no one could explain, and it was only just beginning. The turning point came in January 1993, when 2 hunters veered off a marked trail in the dense woods just north of Henderson, searching for deer. What they found instead would shatter the quiet isolation of Rusk County and confirm the town's worst fears. Nestled among the thick pines, half buried beneath a patch of snow-covered leaves, was a grotesque structure, carefully assembled and eerily deliberate. At first glance, it looked like the remains of a small animal display, the sort hunters sometimes made with antlers or skulls. But as the men got closer, it became clear this was something different, something human. The structure was small, no taller than a child, made of interlaced twigs and dried vines. Strung around it like ornaments were bits of bone, some bleached, others still marred with decaying tissue. The centerpiece was unmistakable. A human skull, partially cracked but intact, placed carefully in the center like a grotesque trophy. Surrounding it in a circular pattern were teeth, arranged as if for ritual or decoration. Vertebrae and finger bones were threaded with wire and hung like charms. When the hunters alerted authorities, the site was immediately cordoned off. Forensics teams combed the area, searching for clues. DNA tests confirmed the skull belonged to Elellanena Riggins, the librarian who had vanished months earlier. It was a devastating blow to the community, proof that the missing weren't just gone. They had been taken, mutilated, and displayed. The discovery ignited panic. News spread fast, and reporters swarmed the quiet county, broadcasting images of the site across national networks. Headlines dubbed the killer the Bone Artist, though locals quickly began referring to him as the Bone Weaver. It was clear that this wasn't just murder. It was a form of expression, a message perhaps, but one no one could understand. The structure wasn't random. Experts in criminal profiling noted the precision of the arrangement, the deliberate choice of bones, the eerie symmetry. This was not the work of someone out of control. It was someone who planned meticulously, someone who took pride in what they were doing. The implications were terrifying. This was only one display. If this killer had gone to such lengths for a single victim, how many more might be out there? Authorities scoured the forest for days, even bringing in cadaver dogs and helicopters with thermal imaging. What they found were more displays. Smaller, older, some barely recognizable. One was tucked beneath a rotting tree stump, another wedged into the fork of a tall oak. In total, 5 such sites were located within a 2-mile radius. Each contained human remains, each arranged with care. Each one was more intricate than the last, and yet no evidence pointed to a suspect. No footprints, no tool marks, no fibers or fingerprints. Whoever had done this had left nothing behind but bones and silence. The displays were scattered just far enough apart to suggest the killer had spent hours, maybe days, in the woods building them. He had the patience, the knowledge of the terrain, and the terrifying confidence that he wouldn't be caught. The county's nightmare was no longer a mystery. It was a living thing, growing quietly among the trees. As 1993 turned into 1994, the sense of dread in Rusk County only deepened. People no longer questioned whether the disappearances were connected. They knew they were. But the discovery of the bone structures had shifted everything. It wasn't just that someone was killing. It was that they were doing it with a purpose, one no one could decipher. And while police increased their efforts, the killer continued undeterred. By early 1995, 6 more individuals had vanished without warning. Their backgrounds varied: a high school janitor, a traveling salesman, a mother of 3, even a drifter, who rarely stayed in one place long enough to be missed. Each case shared the same chilling hallmark: no struggle, no clue, no goodbye. And then, sometime later, weeks or even months, their remains would appear, twisted into yet another grotesque sculpture deep in the woods. The bone weaver had returned to his craft, each display more elaborate and disturbing than the last. One structure featured an entire rib cage, shaped into the form of a flower, and mounted onto a base of intertwined femurs. Another used finger bones to form a crown-like spiral around a jawbone centerpiece. Each arrangement seemed to follow its own twisted logic, like pieces of a puzzle only the killer could understand. Investigators began photographing and documenting every site, hoping to spot a pattern. That's when they noticed something terrifying. When mapped out, the locations of the displays formed a loose spiral across the northern part of the county, coiling inward like a snail shell. It wasn't perfect, but it was deliberate. The spiral grew tighter with each new discovery, almost as if the killer was slowly closing in on something or someone. Law enforcement brought in criminal profilers, mathematicians, and even geomancers to make sense of the design. Some believed it was symbolic. Others thought it might indicate a future epicenter for something larger. But no one could predict when or where the next victim would be taken. Despite national attention, the case brought no closer leads. The killer was methodical, intelligent, and likely knew the woods better than anyone. Some theorized he might be a hunter or forest ranger, someone who could move unseen and erase their tracks with ease. Others speculated he lived off-grid, completely outside society's watchful eye. Rumors swirled, fingers were pointed, but nothing stuck. The FBI opened a formal investigation, classifying the case as the work of an organized serial killer with a compulsion for ritualistic display. They gave him a file name, Subject 17B, but among agents the nickname Bone Weaver stuck. Analysts pored over files from other states, wondering if he had done this before. No matches came up, Then the killing stopped. No new disappearances, no bone structures, no sightings. For years, nothing happened. Some believed the killer had died, moved on, or been imprisoned for another crime. The forest began to reclaim the old sites. Grass grew over footprints, rain wore down the bones, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was a warning. Rusk County had stared into the mind of a monster, and now it was waiting, unsure whether the quiet was the end of a nightmare or just the calm before it began again. In 2009, after more than a decade of silence, the Bone Weaver returned to the public consciousness, but not in the way anyone expected. For years, the woods had held their secrets quietly. Locals resumed their lives, though unease still lingered just beneath the surface. The forest remained a place of quiet fear, where hunters walked a little faster, and children stayed close to home. Everyone hoped the horrors were in the past. Then came the discovery that shattered that illusion. A construction crew clearing land for a new vacation cabin stumbled upon something buried beneath an old hunting shack, long abandoned in the woods. When the ground beneath their equipment gave way slightly, they found a concealed entrance to a small root cellar, hidden under a false floor of packed earth and stones. At first, it seemed like an old storm shelter, but what they uncovered inside brought the nightmare back to life. The cellar was meticulously organized, with shelves built from aged wood and rusted nails. But it wasn't stocked with canned goods or tools. It was filled with bones, hundreds of them, each labeled, sorted, and stored with disturbing care. Some were grouped by body part, others by date. Human jaw bones rested alongside catalogued finger bones in boxes labeled with initials. Skulls were lined neatly on a wooden shelf along the back wall, each tagged with a strip of old masking tape and a year scrawled in faded ink. Investigators were called in immediately. Forensic teams spent days cataloguing the contents of the cellar. The remains confirmed what many had feared. At least 9 victims had been stored there, including several that had never been linked to the Bone Weaver before. Among them were bones matching a teenage girl who had disappeared from a neighboring county in 1988, and another from a missing person case dismissed as a runaway in 1990. These new victims pushed the suspected timeline of the killer back by years, suggesting his reign had begun long before the public ever knew his name. But what truly unsettled authorities were the items found beyond the bones. In a locked trunk, they discovered drawings, crude sketches of the bone structures, some complete and others in early planning stages. Each was labeled with chilling titles like The Gate, The Nest, and The Vessel. There was also a hand-drawn map of the surrounding area, with dozens of red X's marked throughout the forest. Some corresponded to known crime scenes. Others were in unexplored stretches of woods. Tucked behind a rotting piece of plywood, investigators found a Polaroid photograph. It showed a man, possibly in his 50s, standing beside one of the bone structures with a slight smile on his face. He wore a sheriff's deputy uniform. Zooming in revealed a name stitched into the chest: Earl Vance. The revelation shocked the community. Earl Vance had served as a respected deputy in Rusk County for nearly 2 decades. He had responded to several of the original missing persons calls. His calm demeanor and quiet reliability had made him a trusted figure. Now, it seemed, he had been hiding in plain sight, building his legacy of horror one victim at a time. The confirmation that Deputy Earl Vance was the Bone Weaver sent shockwaves through Rusk County and far beyond. It was almost impossible to reconcile the two images: the polite, soft-spoken lawman who had served on the front lines of the investigation, and the meticulous, remorseless killer who had built shrines out of human remains in the very woods he once patrolled. For nearly 20 years, he had hidden in plain sight, questioning witnesses, offering condolences to grieving families, even helping to search for the very victims he had taken. After the discovery of the root cellar and the photograph, a task force was quickly assembled to dig deeper into Vance's past. The first place they searched was his former residence, a modest ranch-style home just outside of town, now owned by another family. In the attic, investigators uncovered a collection of journals, yellowed with age and carefully preserved in a locked chest. The entries were haunting. Vance wrote not like a man burdened by guilt, but like a craftsman detailing a sacred project. He referred to his victims not as people, but as donors, and described the forest as a canvas where his life's work could unfold. Each structure had a purpose. According to his writings, they were not random or symbolic, but parts of something larger, something he called the Great Body. Vance believed that by arranging bones in specific forms, he could transfer the essence of his victims into a unified being. Whether this belief stemmed from mental illness or something darker was never determined. What was clear was that his murders were not acts of rage or impulse, but components of a long-term plan, patiently executed over years. One journal entry dated 1997 read, "Each piece must be placed with intention. The body is growing. When it is whole, it will wake." The entry ended with the number 27 circled 3 times. Authorities eventually confirmed that the number matched the total victim count identified from the bones recovered. But the final entry in the last journal offered no comfort. It read simply, 10 more needed. Despite an exhaustive manhunt, Vance had evaded justice in life. After retiring from the sheriff's department in 2002, he had moved to Mississippi, under a different name. Records showed he lived quietly, worked in a hardware store, and attended church every Sunday. He died of heart failure in late 2008, just months before his secret lair was discovered. No family came forward to claim the body. He was buried in an unmarked grave, yet even in death questions remained. Among the evidence found in the root cellar were 2 sets of bones that didn't match any known victims. Analysts believed they may belong to recent kills, possibly after his retirement. More troubling was a note referencing helpers, suggesting Vance may not have acted entirely alone. Investigators followed leads, but nothing conclusive ever emerged. To this day, new X's from Vance's map remain unexplored, deep in the forest. Search efforts continue sporadically, often yielding fragments, shards of bone, rusted wire, remnants of forgotten horrors. The legacy of Earl Vance, the bone weaver, lingers in those woods, and for the people of Rusk County, the forest has never felt silent again.